why not discuss this? Why not take a look at how next year might look? And I'm wearing a Canada Day themed hat that I got over a year ago for Free Agent Frenzy on July 1st last year. And of course, we didn't have that July 1st this year. We didn't really have a Canada Day here. Locally, they didn't have celebrations, we didn't have fireworks. They had basically a virtual fireworks you could watch on your phone rather than having actual fireworks on July 1st this year. This has been a very different year. The possibility is that 2021 may be a different sort of year as well. The NHL needs to find a way to stay relevant for their TV contracts. For both this one, they need to fulfill this one, or they'll lose about $300 million. I think it's 300 million between the Canadian. It might even be more than that. It might be 500 million if I remember. It's 200 from the Canadian and 200 from the American one. It's a lot of money. So let's just say the NHL, while they lose money in not having gate, they lose money as well by not playing. Now the question mark becomes one of, okay, so at what point does being open cost you more money than it justifies? We've seen the bubble. The bubble has cost the NHL between 75 and $90 million. And so they're losing money out of pocket, but again, it meant that they kept their TV deals from going south on them, because if they hadn't come back and played, they would have owed on those TV deals. It would have been a case where the networks could go to them and say, so you didn't fulfill your agreement with us, we're not paying you that money, and anything we've paid you, you're going to pay us back. So that's part of the reason why hockey's back right now. Now, for next year, we may see the same divisions. You may see Pacific, Central, Metro, and Atlantic. And we may have an 82 game, 70 game, 48 game schedule, 56, 60, 66. I don't know. We may see a full schedule. That's what they want. But we may see as low as 48. We may see 70. And it depends on how you schedule it. Do you have back-to-back games in one city? So you can have more back-to-backs and not worry as much about players getting tired. I think what we've seen in a bubble environment is that if you have less travel, it does seem to help with some of the wear and tear. And so these players have been through it. Right now, as I'm recording this, Tampa Bay and Dallas are both really beat up right now. And it's a matter of balancing this out where you can get the schedule in and trying to make sure that the players, well, that they survive to have a playoffs at the end of it. Now, if the border stays closed, this setup doesn't work. So let's just say the border stays closed. And we have a division of 7 Canadian teams. Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Winnipeg, Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto. So the USA then has to be split into 3 different divisions. West, and I just went West, Central, and Eastern. And I didn't, if other people want to argue about, oh, this team shouldn't be in this, I don't care. I don't. I just went, okay, just for this video, I'm just going to put these teams in these divisions. So in the West, Anaheim, Arizona, LA, San Jose, Vegas, Colorado, Dallas, and St. Louis. In the Central, Chicago, Philadelphia, Columbus, Detroit, Minnesota, Nashville, Pittsburgh, and Washington. What's that? You want to switch St. Louis with Minnesota? Go ahead. I don't care. Eastern, Boston, Buffalo, Detroit. Yes, Detroit's in the Central. Yes, Columbus is in the Central. I know they're in the Eastern time zone. Okay. East, Boston, Buffalo, Florida, New Jersey, Islanders, Rangers, Tampa Bay, and Carolina. So basically, it's the Eastern Seaboard, and they're the East. And I know there's teams in the Central that I know how close Pennsylvania is. It's okay. This is just for the sake of argument. These are not official divisions. There's no need to get upset. So if, let's say, Canadian teams play each other 6 times each, this is where it gets tough. So do you schedule it so that a majority or almost all of those games in Canada are right up front? So you can say okay, so if each team's going to play each other 6 times, you could have them play each other 4 times. 24 games, that buys you 2 months of the season almost. So you could have almost 2 months of the season where the border doesn't matter. The border is not a problem. It's not a big deal. And you have those 2 months where hockey games are going to be played and you can have negotiations with the Canadian government. And hopefully, fingers crossed, that all works out. I know in Canada, there's a lot of people who feel like, if you have family just on the other side of the border, there should be an allowance for family to cross. And right now, there kind of is, but not really. Because if family enters, they have to quarantine for the full 2 weeks, same as hockey players coming in did. You have to quarantine for the full 2 weeks, or at least for their families. And of course, there was an allowance for players coming in because they've been tested daily and all that. and they're in a bubble. They're not interacting with the public. Whereas next season they would definitely be interacting with the public, and it wouldn't be a bubble environment. So there's going to be a change in that setup. There's going to be some kind of relaxing of those requirements in between, I would say, now and the first of the year. I don't know how far that's going to go. I don't think it's going to go very far, but it may allow for the NHL to argue we are, a business in Canada that generates a lot of money, and there may be some sort of an allowance for businesses as well. People who work across the border have been able to cross for work reasons, depending on what that job is and all of that. But I think things will get relaxed a bit. But if they're not, you can have the Canadian division on their own. You can have the West, Central, and Eastern USA teams playing against each other as well. So the way this would break down is Canadian teams play each other 6 times each. And then you have 24 games against the teams outside the Division 1. And then you add 12 rival games to get to a 72-game season. It's not a perfect setup. It means that you're not going to play every team twice. You'll play half of the American teams twice and half of them once. And you get to 72 games that way. So it's not an 82-game schedule. And so you can tighten up the schedule by about a month. You can shorten it by about a month from where it would have been. And depending on how many back-to-backs you have, you might be able to shave off a couple of weeks as well. But let's just say that they play less. Now, I also want to throw in the U.S. You'd be playing 5 games against each team in your own division. So there's 8 teams in each division, so you're playing 5 games against each of the other 7 teams. And in the Canadian division, of course, you're playing 6 against your own division, 6 other teams. Now, it'll be 23 games, or 23 teams outside of your division, so that doesn't add up quite as nicely. And you end up with 14 rivalry games outside of that. So scheduling becomes a little bit hectic, but again, it's a 72-game season and it works. You play all the other 23 teams outside of your division once a minimum, and then 14 other games to make up for it as well. So more than half of the league you're going to see twice, but there's going to be those teams you only see once. Now, if they go with a shorter schedule, and there's the argument about, well, they need to do a 48-game schedule. Okay. You could do 4 times 6 in the Canadian division, and then 24 games outside the division, and it doesn't matter who it's against. And then you can have 28 games, 4 times 7 inside the division in the American, and 20 games outside the division. So you can come up with a scheduling situation where in those 20 games outside your division, you may play the Canadian teams a certain number of times. Where it gets dicey is if we don't end up with some sort of an allowance, and if it still involves a 2-week quarantine, at some point, U.S. teams have to play in Canada, because otherwise you're only going to have Canadian teams playing at home against other Canadian teams, and then the rest of the season they're on the road. That doesn't work against unless you just don't play the American teams and you only play within your own division, which I don't think would be something that I think Canadian fans would be all that happy with. You can have an 48-game schedule. You can play each team in Canada 8 times and come up with 48 games. But by about that 7th time Vancouver's playing Winnipeg, there might be some fans in Canada that are kind of tired of the matchup. And, in the States then, do you have all 24 teams playing against each other an even number of games? And you'll see them like 3 or 4 times, or twice. So you'd play the other teams in the States twice to come to 48. No, because then you got 24, 23, so it'd be 2 times each plus 2 extra games. It's not going to be an easy setup either way. It's going to be a schedule-making nightmare. Now, keep in mind, they have to figure out exactly what they're going to do. You have to think a minimum of a month beforehand. And some of these buildings are going to be empty. Some of these buildings are not going to be holding any public events for a long time. So you don't have to worry about dates for the buildings like you would any other season, which is why sometimes the scheduling looks so weird. Where you'll say, why is that team on the road for 2.5 weeks? And then you find out there was something booked in the building, or there was some kind of maintenance in the building and they couldn't be at home. There was a big tournament for another sport that was booked. That means that they have to go out. And in the New York Rangers case, sometimes it meant the circus was in town and they couldn't play at home. So those are things that they probably don't have to worry about this year, but it's going to be a bit of a logistical nightmare. And the Canadian border creates a large problem unless, and I mentioned this in the video where I talked about next season, in a couple videos I've mentioned this, unless you take a look at the Canadian border and you say that's a non-starter, we'll take the divisions, leave them the same, put the Canadian teams in locations in the U.S. where they can be hosted this year, and do this as a stopgap, and then 2021, 2022, everybody's playing at home. That would be a situation that I think every Canadian would scream about, because at that point we'd be like, okay, so a Canadian team's going to win the Stanley Cup because they're not playing at home. Great. And that is not an ideal. There's going to be a lot of discussions over how to get this done, how to make this work, and it's going to be something that has to be voted on. And both, keep this in mind, the NHL can't just push this through. The NHL just can't say, here's how we're playing, and that's it. And if you don't like it, we don't care, which is something we've seen in other sports. In the NHL, the PA has to agree to it. The NHLPA has to say, we agree to this. This is fine with us. It doesn't bother us. We're going to go with this setup. So until they come up with a setup that the NHLPA agrees to, we're going to be having debates and discussions. I do think there will probably be a shortened schedule. That's why I'm looking at this as 72. Over here I've got 70. There are various ways to get to that number. And again, if you start in, say, late December, let's say you start on December 26th, and you're trying to get to 70 games, you might be able to feasibly do that and get the regular season done by end of April. And so you're only talking about being a few weeks behind where you normally are, because you've shaved 12 games off the schedule. And not only that, but by being a 70-game schedule instead of 82, it means there's less wear and tear for the hockey players. And it also means that it makes it a little bit cheaper for the NHL to do the necessary testing and to get everything done as quickly as possible. And of course, the big consideration that's not on the board is when fans will be allowed in attendance, how many, and how all that's going to work. And the longer they push this back, it's the same as the bubble scenario we saw for the playoffs. The longer they push it back, the better able they are going to be to see how this is going to work or not going to work. So the scheduling is going to be interesting. Okay, so let me know what you guys think in the comment section below regarding how best to approach this if you're the National Hockey League. Because starting next week, they're going to sit down and start having preliminary discussions. And I guarantee pretty quickly this sort of stuff is going to be coming up. We hit October this coming week. October's normally when a season is starting. So if they want to get back on a schedule where next October the season is starting, they need to figure all of this stuff out at least up front and come out and say, we have decided that if we play on December 1st, we'll have an 82-game schedule. If we play on December 15th, we'll have a 70-game schedule. If we play on January 1st, it'll be... And go back. And basically say to fans, here's the plan. We will let you know which schedule works best for us and where the drop-dead date is for the 2020-2021 season. Players are being bought out. That's going to happen until October 8th. Contracts are being signed. Draft picks are being taken. All of this stuff is still going on. As far as the NHL is concerned, there will be a 2020-2021 season. A lot of the people I've seen commenting that it's not going to happen are the exact same people that in March said we would not have a Stanley Cup playoffs and I needed to stop talking about it. I was dreaming. And now we're on the verge of seeing a Stanley Cup champion crowned. So in this environment where we don't know when the end date is, where everything will go back to normal, we don't have to worry about border crossings, I can start going to Vegas again, because we don't know when that is. You kind of need to approach this from a business point of view, like, okay, this is the reality right now and we will live in it, and then when things get better, great, but we have to kind of assume that they won't. You have to kind of, when you're planning this out, you have to assume a worst case scenario. And so that's why pushing it back makes some sense. Where you can say, okay, worst case scenario, we'll go ahead, we'll push this back until January 1st. Not June, January 1st. And, not December 1st. And then we'll be looking at a situation where first quarter of 2021, things start to improve. We can start getting fans into the arenas. And we can start, discussing 2021, 2022 at that stage. Because, of course, if you don't have a season this year with Seattle coming in next year, The exposure rules are going to have to get changed, and that's a whole other can of worms that I don't know that we necessarily want to get into, and I don't have to today. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And this is a fascinating topic. I may end up covering it again, probably a couple of times I would think in between now and when we get into next season. But, you know, a little over 2 weeks from now, teams are going to be able to open up their training facilities. Players are going to be on the ice, and they're going to start getting restless. They're going to want to play, and they're going to want to find a way to do it as safely as possible and in a way that makes sense for both the NHL and the NHLPA, because when the NHL makes more money, so does the union, and vice versa. For the union to make more money, the NHL has to get more. So this is a mutually beneficial relationship, and that's why I think, much like the playoffs, they'll figure something out. Won't be a bubble, but it might have to be something that's really, really modified to take the travel aspect and really shorten that down. The ironic part is, if you have a Canadian division, the travel is a nightmare for a Canadian division because Canada's a big country, and those 7 teams are far more spread out than any of these other divisions. So that is definitely an issue that Canadian teams would be dealing with. But by not crossing the border, and I would say for at least the first month of the season, it would allow the NHL to kick that can down the road a little bit. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. The channel passed 163,000 subscribers like a day and a half ago, I think it was. Thank you guys for that. And I will be here providing daily videos no matter what happens. Thanks again. I'll talk to you again soon.